Hi, my name is Tyler Mowry, and welcome to the Writer's Mind Podcast, episode 51. All right, welcome to another episode of the podcast. If you want to listen to episode 52 and all of the even episodes, then you can find them on the Patreon at patreon.com/thewritersmind. So today, what I want to talk about is a book I've been reading. This book is called Fooled by Randomness by Nassim Taleb. I'm pretty sure I've talked about Nassim Taleb before on this podcast. He also wrote this book right here, which is called Anti-Fragile, which is about the things that increase in strength by chaos and by disorder and this sort of thing. And Fooled by Randomness, I've been reading this book, and it is absolutely fantastic, very, very interesting. And what he is really talking about in it. Also, Nassim Taleb was I don't know if he still does, but he is a trader, and he talks a lot about the markets in this, like different markets, and he also talks about just how that plays in, how his understanding of the markets and his understanding of randomness then plays into the other areas of life. And so one of the big things he starts off talking about in this book is that what we do as people, right, is that we build a mental construction of our world, and within this mental construction, things follow a sequence of order way more than they actually do in reality. So because we have such limited minds, what we like to do is we like to create, this event happened because of this, and that happened because of that, and we sort of walk our minds down the logical cause and effect pathway that we understand. When in reality, what actually happened or how things actually work can be way more complicated and way more random. One of the biggest things that he talks about in this, just from the start, is about how people attribute their success to specific things like, their hard work, their intelligence, their decision making, all of these sorts of things. And one of the things that he says is that people get lucky a lot more than they realize, and then they turn around and say, this thing that happened was because I was doing this, and this, and they don't actually realize that they're a lucky fool and not somebody that actually knew what they were doing. So within this book, let me find the prologue here. Let's see. One moment. So in the prologue, he starts out and he talks about lucky fools. And this is actually something that I've been thinking about in my own life because, I'll talk about it in a minute. But one of the things he starts off by saying is that this book is about luck disguised and perceived as non-luck, that is, skills, and more generally, randomness disguised and perceived as non-randomness, that is, determinism. And then he says that it manifests itself in the shape of the lucky fool, defined as a person who benefited from a disproportionate share of luck, but attributes his success to some other, generally very precise reason. And so one of the things that I was thinking about is how I feel like this is something that's happened in my life. And one of the things that he talks about is like trying to look back and reframe like what happened and why things happened after they happen. And he talks about scientists who believe that experiments or believe that studies and this sorts of things, like they operated at this certain causal chain when in reality they didn't. And then he looks at people who are in different markets, and he talks about people believe that they call markets correctly, that they have an intelligent understanding of what's happening in a market, and then what actually happens is they don't know what they're doing and they're just getting lucky. They were in the right place at the right time. And so for me, I think that that's something that happened to me very recently. So I don't know if you guys, how close you in particular follow me in what I'm doing, but one of the things I've done is tweet a lot about Bitcoin, and I'm really into and interested in Bitcoin. And I have one of the Bitcoin standard books right there. And I was thinking about more recently how if you are following crypto markets whatsoever, there was a huge blow off top. Bitcoin hit $64,000 all the way up from about 8,000, which it was in the end of 2020 or about that point, and had this crazy blow up, right? And for me, I was in Bitcoin. I found Bitcoin in 2019, and I was learning about it. And I started, buying some and this sort of thing. And then we had this crazy run up, right? And this is somebody that I am somebody that's never really invested heavily. So like before 2019, 2020, I did not have a stock portfolio. It wasn't, I've been writing and learning about writing and building a YouTube channel. I haven't really been doing that. But what I found, and one of the things that I've been thinking about, is how I want to build a production company. I want to, allocate capital so that I can actually have real say and real control in films that get made. And so that's one of the things that I'm also working on as I'm, writing. And so I saw this as a potential method of increasing my capital. And so it worked. I mean, I bought in and it ran up, and I didn't sell when it was at 60,000, and I wrote, and it's fallen all the way down to 29,000, and then actually as I'm recording this podcast, it's kind of back up at 40 or something. But what happened was when we came down, I was just thinking about, in hindsight, how obvious it was that was a top, right? Like indicators, sort of, stock indicators and this sort of thing, trading indicators were showing that we were at a crazy top. And then even culturally, everybody and their mom was talking about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and NFTs and all this stuff, right? We have rappers releasing NFT albums, and it's of course, this is the top, but I didn't see it, right? Why did I not see it? Well, it was because that I was just somebody who got lucky and found this thing at the right time in 2019, and it went up, and I had no idea what I was doing whatsoever. And so as markets move and bubbles are created and there's just the insanity of a market, I just missed all the indicators that it was the time to sell, and sort of just watched a lot of my gains disappear. And after that, it really made me go, okay, hold on, what's going on? I really don't know what I'm doing. Why did I miss this, right? And for a little bit, especially kind of in May and June, I was really frustrated about this. And then more recently, and kind of reading in this book, it's really interesting, to see what Nassim Taleb is talking about here, in the sense of people getting lucky in markets and then just believing that they had some sort of skill, right? When Bitcoin and all these cryptocurrencies are just blowing off, everybody is making money. It's like you put money in something and it goes up. Everybody's making money. Everybody's happy. Everybody's crushing it, right? Then when it turns down, now people start losing money, and I think you start trying to wise up when there's no reason to learn when things are going well, right? You only learn when things are going poorly. And so I was really thinking about that, and I really think that I really fit into Nassim Taleb's archetype of the lucky fool, where I was somebody told me about something at the right time, and I got in at the right time, and it went up, and I didn't know when to sell because I was not being rational, and I wasn't taking the time to actually educate myself. I was just riding the wave of a cult, right? And so I think that in a world where it kind of just keeps going up to this day, then I'm still in this sort of, I would still be in this fairy tale land where it's going to go up forever. There's no reason to sell, and we're going to go to 1 million, right? And one of the things that he's talking about in regards to markets and randomness and trading is he's talking about minimizing risk and increasing certainty and the different ways that you do that. And he's saying, like, you don't want to be a lucky fool. You want to be somebody that can actually increase the certainty of the fact that they will be right on something and minimize the randomness and the uncertainty that can come with whatever you're doing. And so then he gets into, an understanding of the world in a probabilistic way, which is where things can get interesting, where he's talking about if you play Russian roulette for $10 million, this is one of the examples that he uses, and you win, then did you actually make the right choice to play? Because you won and you got the money, but that does not necessarily mean that was the correct choice, that was the correct thing to do. You just got lucky and it worked out in your favor. And talking about, like, that is a very clear-cut understanding of, like, okay, we have a very clear understanding of what is the risk, what is the probability that this doesn't work out in my favor. But then when you come into life and you come into markets or you come into the job world, building a career, this sort of thing, the variables are a lot harder to pin down with such clarity because we live in a very complex world. And so he's talking about, but one of the things he said is, like, there is an actual difference in success through actual skills building and measurable kind of certainty rather than success built off of luck and randomness. And the reason that he says this is because the person that you are is extremely valuable and actually impacts how you handle success and how you actually operate as a person. And one of the things he talks about, let me see if I can pull this up. I think this was back in chapter 2. Let me see. He talks about some of the he talks about some of the people in great stories like the Iliad, and he's talking about how it's not necessarily about whether you win or lose as much as it is the character that you have and the way that you play the game. And he's talking about that, understanding that somebody can be like an honorable hero, looking at, these old sort of Greek stories, looking at somebody as an honorable hero, they can be an honorable hero whether or not they win or lose. And that comes down to the character traits that they are using to play the game, right? They're not lucky fools. They are people that are trying to increase their uncertainty and be honorable in this sort of thing. I thought it was a really interesting idea. And I feel like this really applies to screenwriting as well, right? Because I think what happens in Los Angeles is that there's a lot of screenwriters that are lucky fools, where they don't really know why they became successful. They just became successful. So they came to LA and they started networking, and eventually somebody looked at their script and read it, and they had an idea that was cool enough, and they brought some other person to rewrite some elements of it to make it work, and suddenly, boom, they got a paycheck. They're a screenwriter now, and they can continue forward. And so what that is they got lucky, they met the right person, and things worked out for them. Ideally, we don't want to be doing that, right? Like, ideally, what we want to do is increase the certainty of our own success. How do we do that? Well, we do it pretty simply, right? Because ideally, we have to think about, okay, what are the things that we can control, and how do we optimize for a higher level of certainty in our own success based upon the things that we actually can control, and an understanding that things do happen randomly, we do get lucky, and there just is a consistent element of randomness in the system. Well, the biggest thing that we can do is write well, right? Like, if you write 5 awesome, actually objectively great screenplays, you are minimizing your uncertainty, right? You are maximizing your ability to get something sold and minimizing the necessity for the right connection or the right, agent to read it and this sort of thing. And so ideally what we do is we can anchor our own success on the things that we can control, and then elements that are random or are, situational, we can take higher advantage of them when they come. And so I think that what happens is people focus so heavily on trying to find, the person that is going to read their story and help them and make them into a screenwriter, when they just need to be writing better. And then once they have something that's genuinely great, then suddenly it's a lot easier to move into the industry. It's a lot easier to get noticed at festivals, or get high rankings on the blacklist, or create a short film that wins a major festival that you can then shop a feature through. Like, all of that becomes a lot easier if you actually have done the work on your end to create something strong. I've always thought it was cool kind of what Nick Pizzolatto did, the writer of True Detective, where he was a professor for a long time, and then when he was kind of ready to bring his stories to Hollywood, he did, and was pretty quickly successful. Why? Because he spent a really long time actually honing his craft and making sure that his stories worked. And so this one is kind of all over the place here, this podcast. But like, the idea of finding ways to minimize risk and increase certainty, I think, is a really valuable way to think about things. And I think that looking at myself and trying to figure out, okay, I have these larger goals, both in screenwriting and also on the production side, right? I want to build a production company. So how do I begin to increase the certainty of those things rather than simply kind of betting and hoping my way through? And so I think that something like Bitcoin was a gamble that paid off fairly well. And that's, a great thing to have happen. And maybe, everybody thinks that we're still going to go up, and maybe we do. Maybe we don't. But having your bets placed on the irrationality and randomness of other people and what they do is not the best long-term solution. And I think it's important. One of the things that I have learned right now is like how much you can not know about things, and reminding yourself that just because you instantly do well at something doesn't mean you actually know what you're doing. And it's easy for us to look back and track success and say, oh, because of this intelligent strategy that I used, or this particular skill set that I used, I ended up getting this result, where it may not actually be that way. Now, on the flip side of that, skills and strategy do matter, and that is what you are optimizing for by bringing your uncertainty level down and becoming more certain about how you're going to become successful. But it's where it gets muddy is believing you actually have skills that you don't actually have, and then getting lucky. Because when you believe that your success is based on skills that you think you have and you don't actually have, then you end up in a bad situation. You end up, losing a ton of your gains because you're a lucky fool. And that's what I was doing. So I hope that's helpful for you. I think this is the next podcast, podcast 52, which is available on the Patreon, is also about this book, because there's a lot of stuff that I didn't cover in this episode that he talks about, and I think is really interesting. But I think that the idea really having an understanding that the world really exists outside of our own minds, and that like what we want to do is we want to be able to construct our own reality. And I think a lot of that is by constructing your own mentality, but there's also the element of understanding that the world is more complex than you realize, and having an element of certainty that is too high can come back to bite you and make you not look at what your potential blind spots are more objectively. And so, that's the big thing about growth, which is that we are always, if you are growing, you are trying to find what isn't working. What are the blind spots? Where are you lacking? Where do you believe that you are correct about something and you aren't, right? And that's the biggest issue. Usually your biggest blind spots are not something that you don't know, but they are something that you think you know that you actually are wrong about. And that, I think, is where I was, where I really thought I knew what I was doing, and I didn't. And that is what ends up biting you. So hopefully that's helpful. If you want to listen to podcast 52 and listen to me talk more about this book, you can. Links below. And I'll see you guys next week.